There you have it, folks. It is 5 o'clock, and it is time for Finding Our Fit with Susanna. And, well, I just want you to know this is WRWK LPFM, Midlothian, Virginia, and we are happy to have you as our listeners. So, without further ado, Susanna, take it away.
Thank you, Ron. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Susanna Wu-Pong Calvert, host of Finding Our Fit. The purpose of this program is to find our fit with our crazy and beautiful world. And in doing so, we'll enrich our world and create a brighter future for everyone and everything, especially Earth. I am also the founder and convener for the Foundation for Family and Community Healing, where we are also helping everyone learn the skills that are needed to find our fit. So I hope you'll join us there on healingedu.org. Today I'm here with Susan Lindsay, and I'll welcome Susan. I'll ask Susan to give a brief introduction about herself.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I'm Susan Lindsay, the Director of Programs with the Cameron K. Gallagher Foundation. And the foundation focuses on cultivating awareness and understanding of teen depression and anxiety, and which is something near and dear to my heart as I have two tweens myself. So I find a lot of intersection between my work and then my personal world, kind of colliding and supporting each other, and which is really great.
Oh, that's so beautiful when we can have such a sense of purpose in the work that we do every day. What a ideal place to be able to be of service in a way that is most meaningful for you. Thank you for coming today, Susan. In this program, we do want to help make sense of our crazy, beautiful world, and I want to talk in more detail about the work of the Cameron K. Gallagher Foundation. because really our goal for this program in Finding Our Fit is to choose the beautiful over the crazy. So we could just create this more beautiful reality now and going forward, and especially for future generations. And especially right now, I think this is such an important time for this type of conversation, because the narratives out there in social media and in the news seem like focus so much on the crazy part. And it has the impact of making me, and maybe all of us, feel crazy too. And it's not only that the stories are so upsetting, because they are, there's so much to be concerned about right now, but it also starts to make us think that that's all there is. And that's just not true. And it also makes us think that there are no solutions, or there's nothing that we can really do. And that's also not true. I mean, granted that a lot of the problems require a collective solution, and we can pursue those together, but there's also a lot we can do in our own lives and for our sphere of influence that we can make an impact on. So in this program, we want to find our fit so that we can understand what to do to create a more beautiful, less crazy world. And one thing we can do, and we don't do enough of it, is to take care of ourselves and each other, not just physically, but also mentally and emotionally. And one barrier for doing this, it seems to me, and I'd love to hear from Susan what she thinks, is that A, we don't know what to do, like how to do this. And secondly, another one that it's surprising to me this still exists, but it seems like there's a stigma still in a lot of cases, or for some people, about this. And it's really kind of crazy because, I'm of the age where I was taught dental hygiene, physical health, and nutrition. So if we understand we need to do that for our bodies, why don't we think that we need to take care of our minds and our feelings in the same way? So shouldn't we have emotional and psychological hygiene classes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, and I think it's really interesting because before the show started, Susan and I were talking about how our kids went to Pinchbeck Elementary. And so we were in the same school district. And and it was probably more late Pinchbeck or more when my kids were in middle school, I started to hear the stories about what was going on with these kids and these risky behaviors and the tragedies, the challenges in their families, like depression and addiction and violence maybe, and thinking, how come we're not doing more? Why are we only teaching about physical and dental hygiene? Why are we not attending to this in our schools where our kids need it and their families need it too? And so I was literally having conversations with people in the school district, and everybody was like, yeah, good idea. But that was in the 90s. And so now I can say, finally,
It's changing.
it's
Yes.
changing. And we are so fortunate to have the Cameron K. Gallagher Foundation in our community to provide support for this. We don't have to figure it out on our own or just throw up our hands in despair about this. So today's program, we're focusing on fostering teen mental and emotional health. And so I'm so glad to have Susan here today to help us learn about this topic, because whether you have a teen or a younger person in your family, or even thinking about our own mental and emotional health, I think there's so much that we can learn to, in terms of taking better care of ourselves, physically, mentally, and emotionally, especially during this crazy time we're living in. So I think the timing of this is really wonderful. And I am so grateful to the Cameron K. Gallagher Foundation for their beautiful work. So, so again, welcome, Susan. And maybe you can, for those who are listening who may not know about the Cameron K. Gallagher Foundation, can you tell us about the foundation, what you do, and how the organization came to be?
In the origin, yes.
Yeah.
Amazing story.
I would love to. So actually what you said at the very beginning struck me when you were talking about the craziness of the world today, but finding beauty in that. I think that, it made me think, reminds me of the Gallaghers finding beauty in pain, creating beauty out of something tragic. So Cameron Gallagher was a 16-year-old who grew up here in Richmond. She went to Freeman High School in Henrico County, and she struggled greatly with depression and anxiety. And she didn't understand why people wouldn't talk about it. She realized, in going through her struggles, that she wasn't the only one who struggled, but nobody really wanted to talk about it. And so she really wanted to get people talking, and she had started doing some road races, like 5Ks, 10Ks, and she really loved the atmosphere of races. Done any kind of race, you know that it's people are cheering on the sidelines, fellow racers are cheering you on the course. The atmosphere of races is generally just very positive and a unique atmosphere. And she decided that she wanted to create a race called the Speak Up 5K to encourage her peers, especially to speak up about depression and anxiety. And so she started planning this race. And she had come to running as partially as a coping mechanism for, her mental health, or positive coping strategy. And she decided she was going to run the Shamrock Half Marathon. And so she was planning this race while she was training for the Shamrock Half Marathon. And she ran the Shamrock race, and she crossed the finish line, and she passed away in her parents' arms of an undiagnosed heart condition. And so they knew she was planning the race, but they didn't realize the extent to which she had planned it until they were going through her things after she passed, and they found a speech that she had written. She had reached out to Sweet Frog for sponsorship. She had planned, it was to be in their neighborhood. She had planned the course. And so, they had to do the race. So the first Speak Up 5K was in 2014. And has been every year since. And that was also the year the foundation was created, in 2014. And so our Speak Up 5K this year is on September 11th in Bird Park. Of course, we also have a virtual option. And this race really is still about speaking up about depression, anxiety. And if you have not participated in the Speak Up 5K, it is unlike any 5K that you will ever do. It was designed by a 16-year-old, and it feels like it was designed by a 16-year-old. There are fun zones throughout the course. There's silly string. There's water guns. There's a rave tent with streamers and music that you run through. It's really, one of the things that I think makes it so special is that it brings such lightness and beauty and fun and energy to a topic that generally is kind of heavy and dark. And it's really beautiful. So that is how the foundation came to be. So the funds raised from the Speak Up 5K go to support our mental wellness programs. And they are always free to teens because we never want cost to be a barrier to access. So we have 3 main programs that we implement. One is our mental wellness toolkits, which are e-learning courses. Another is our Conversations with CKG virtual discussion series, where once a month we have a guest expert and we talk about a mental health topic that pertains to teens. So, for example, this year we have done ADHD, video game and screen addiction, disordered eating and body image, cultivating resilience. So they really just run the gamut. And then we also support Speak Up clubs in schools, which are student-initiated and student-led, that support the mission of the foundation in their high school. So we have had a big shift this year due to the pandemic. Pre-pandemic, we did in-person workshops in schools, which of course last year a lot of Richmond City schools were virtual the entire school year. So we spent the year developing these e-learning courses, and we have launched 3. We have life transitions, stress awareness, and resilience. And so those are available really to anyone who works with teens. It doesn't have to be a school. It can be any organization that works with teens.
And families too?
Yes, and families too. And we've had a few homeschool parents reach out to use them with their teens. We just asked the school organization or individual to sign a use agreement, which just outlines copyright, student data privacy, because they do have to use an email address to access the courses. And then that they're for educational purposes. It's not therapy. It's not a risk assessment of risky behaviors. It's just purely educational.
Mm-hmm. What a touching story. What an inspiring young lady. She had such vision and courage at such a young age. I mean, many of us adults are afraid to speak up, and that she had the vision and leadership to plan something I probably wouldn't even, and I'm an experienced leader. So what an impressive young lady, and what a legacy she's left.
She really was kind of wise beyond her years at a very young age. And you're right. It's hard sometimes as an adult to speak about mental health. I will say, I think we can see over generations. So I'm the same type of generation time span where mental health was never mentioned in school or in my family. Honestly, I think if you had asked me as a teen what mental health was, I probably would have equated it with mental illness.
Yeah.
That it was schizophrenia or it was, some big diagnosis. Not something that everyone has. We all have a brain, so we all have mental health.
Right. And hold that thought, because I just want to do a quick reminder that we are WRWK 93.9 FM. This is Finding Our Fit. I'm Susanna Wupong Calvert here with Susan Lindsay of the Cameron K. Gallagher Foundation. And I would love anybody who'd like to call in to our phone line at 804-464-1089 to please call in. Or if you're on Facebook Live, just pop us a little chat if you want to have a comment or question. I want you to talk about this that we all have a brain, and so therefore we all have mental health. Sometimes I feel like I only have half a brain. But before I do, I also want to just point out the resilience of the Gallagher family for what is an unspeakable loss, and turning it into recognizing the opportunity and the need in the community. As Cameron brought forth, and also having the commitment to see it through into a real solution. So part of mental health, I think, is embracing the resilience that can come of loss and tragedy and challenge. And we talked about this last week with our loss and grief topic, that there's always opportunity as well, either for our own learning and growth, and even in terms of giving a hand to others who might be experiencing the same thing. Foundation for Family and Community Healing was born in the same manner. But going back to this idea that we all need mental health, I mean, can you talk more about that, Susan, what you mean by that?
Sure. I actually like to use the term with our programming mental wellness, because it's we talk a lot about wellness programs, especially if you're in the corporate world. You probably had a wellness program at your company for a long time. And they traditionally have focused on, and we think of physical health, getting enough exercise, to prevent diabetes and things like that. But the same is true of our mental health, that we can proactively care for our mental health and our mental wellness, just like we do for our physical health.
Right. And so how do we care for our own mental health? And then a related question, how do we help care for other people's mental health?
So one of the best definitions that I heard just in conversation with someone about what is mental wellness, someone said, well, it's the quality of our thoughts and emotions. And I thought about that for a long time. And it's still, I think, my favorite definition I've ever heard of what mental wellness is, because it's what our brain controls, is our thoughts and our emotions. And when they're unhealthy, that's when we have depression or anxiety or any other struggles. So if we focus on that definition, the quality of our thoughts and emotions, then there are clear steps we can take. And a lot of them everyone has heard before, getting enough sleep. There's tons of research that shows getting enough sleep affects our physical health as well as our mental health, that it's just super important for our overall health and well-being. Getting enough exercise. But also practicing, mindfulness or meditation. These practices could be prayer for some people. These practices that encourage getting space between what has happened and what our response is. So instead of reacting immediately, like so many of us do, and I think it's probably just human nature, having these practices where we practice being in the present moment, and thinking of, a more thoughtful response to what has happened instead of this knee-jerk reaction.
Yes, that was so well explained. Thank you, Susan. That mindfulness of having space between what happened and, excuse me, our response. And so our response includes how we interpret and translate what's going on in our environment, and then the emotional reaction that happens as a result, right? Because that actually happens in that order, even though it could happen super fast, right?
Right.
And so sometimes the way we're interpreting a situation might be microseconds, and then we're having an emotional response. And the problem can be, and please correct me if I'm wrong, at least from my own lived experience, is that I have a lot of junk in here that comes out of I think it's a pretty good brain. It's gotten me far in life, but it also can be very fearful and judgmental and just flat out wrong. and and if I don't pause to make sure that I'm my conclusion about a situation has any accuracy at all, if I don't pause, then I'll just go into that emotional reaction, and then I might feel like this whole situation's out of control, and sometimes I hear people say, "Well, Susan, you made me feel this way." Well, it's like, well, my thought about that made me feel that way, and the great thing about that is that I can change my mind about my thoughts.
Exactly.
Right?
And you can experience those emotions with some curiosity instead of a reaction. So, wow, that really made me angry. You don't have to act on that anger. You can just kind of sit. It's almost like looking at it from the outside and, like that really made me angry. I wonder what that's about, instead of responding immediately, reacting.
Yeah. And that response might be justifiable, even on sort of an objective lens to some degree. But for me, it was like, well, why am I, if this was an infraction this big, why am I making it this big? And I found that that's usually like, do I really have to go there and believe that? Because, and then if I take responsibility for my thoughts and beliefs, and that they may be wrong or unfair or fear-based unnecessarily, that then I have power over how I feel. Like, I'm not giving it to you or to a situation that I may have no control over. Like, we're all probably pretty mad at COVID, but I don't have control over that. But I do have control about my beliefs and thoughts about that, and therefore my reaction.
Yes, exactly. Because here's the amazing thing about the brain, we control our thoughts and emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it feels like we don't, like they happen so fast and so intensely. It feels like we have no control over that anger, or that fear, whatever that huge emotion is, intense emotion that we're experiencing. But we do. We have control over our brains because that's how our brain works, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, so we have control over our brains and our thoughts about our experience. And if we don't like our experience, we can find a healthier way to think about it, right? So, and you're not necessarily saying, okay, I'm going to just say this isn't an issue or something I shouldn't worry about, but maybe it is. But maybe it's also something, well, okay, what's a responsible response? A thing to say, a thing to do, right? It's not like just saying, okay, everything's okay, even if it's not. It's just to decide what is a constructive response.
Exactly. And there's no judgment to your emotions, right? Emotions are just emotions. They're just what you're feeling. They're not good or bad. The reaction can be maybe good or bad, but the emotion itself is just what it is.
It is what it is.
I've always liked that expression that civilization exists in that moment between the stimulus and the response.
Right. And
that's a good quote.
Right. It's wonderful. And if we are more intentional and aware about that space, we can be more intentional and aware about our civilization.
Yes. And so I will segue into the other thing that makes for strong, healthy civilizations are strong, healthy relationships, which is another key component of mental wellness, is having, strong relationships. And as a key, we'll get to, things like maybe trauma and, the idea when we talk about myths about mental health, like, oh, kids are just resilient, which can be true, but not necessarily. But the indicator of how children respond as they grow later in their life to significant trauma as a child, relationships are one of the most important things. It's not necessarily the therapy. It's not, it is
Wow.
the relationships in their life.
Oh, wow. That's great. I'll have to get those references from
Yeah,
you.
there's a great book called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog by Dr. Bruce Perry, who he worked with children who experienced very significant trauma, like the kids that came out of Waco, Texas.
Oh,
And that was is his, the kind of in his conclusion at the end of the book is that is one of the most significant
wow.
things for these kids.
And thank you so much for that plug, because as I've mentioned many times, Foundation for Family and Community Healing helps us all develop those skills we need to create healthy relationships. So, I love that we talk about it here in Finding Our Fit. And I encourage you, if you want to go develop those skills, relationship skills, to check out our website, healingedu.org. We walk you people step by step through developing these skills and healthier behaviors. And we talk about mindfulness and that moment between what happened and then our thoughts and then our response. And meditation helps to expand, give us that space so that we can be more intentional about choosing beauty and grace and kindness and wisdom in that space, instead of our reptilian brain just flashing out and making a choice that we might regret. That's really beautiful, Susan. And what the Cameron K. Gallagher Foundation provides that awareness and the skills, helping people develop the skills to cultivate that wellness as well. And it's interesting because we're talking about mental wellness and relationship health. They're so intertwined, you can't really separate them. And the science of well-being, positive psychology, also talks about how healthy relationships are so essential to our ability to thrive. They're one of the main ingredients. So there's so many overlapping themes, and that these all feed into each other in a beautiful, but also potentially tragic way if we're not more aware and practicing our mental hygiene, our mental wellness.
Absolutely. It's very layered.
Yes.
So many layers.
And so many opportunities, really. I'm not sure like the details of us understanding all of it matters, except that we that we are more aware of taking care of our mental health and our relationship health, along with the rest of our financial health, physical health, etc. So this is WRWK 93.9 FM. I'm Susanna Wupong Calvert here on Finding Our Fit with Susan Lindsay of the Cameron K. Gallagher Foundation. And just a reminder that you may call in and chat with us or ask a question if you have one for Susan at 804-464-1089, or you could chat with us on Facebook Live. So we'd love to hear from you. So unless you have anything else to share about why mental health matters, or things that we ought to know about mental wellness, I'd like to maybe transition into thinking about prevention. Because part of fostering mental wellness is also preventing mental illness. So developing this mental and emotional resilience can help us prevent developing mental illness, right? So what, besides being mindful, what other advice or suggestions do you have for us to maintain our own health or cultivate the mental health wellness of those around us?
Well, I think that we kind of have to talk about stigma here, because the first step really is being able to talk about mental health. and fostering a dynamic in your family or, in your community where it's okay to talk about it and to ask for help. Because if you can't ask for help, then, it snowballs. And it's a lot easier to practice mental wellness before there's a problem than if you're already down this road and struggling and, it becomes a crisis, just like with physical health, then it's a lot harder to address that.
Right.
So I think the first step is being able to have a conversation about it. And there's a lot of reasons that there's stigma. One, so it's interesting because teens are much more comfortable talking about mental health a lot of times than adults because they grew up talking about it much more than we did. And so, it's a challenge for parents today. On top of that, the world that teens are growing up in and experiencing is a very different world than we grew up in. We didn't grow up with the internet. They have grown up with not only the internet, but, iPhones and smartphones. And it's just very different. So I think it makes it even more important for the lines of communication to be open and to admit that we don't have all the answers, but we will get help.
Mm-hmm. And so this just, I think, reiterates how courageous Cameron was in her lifetime, that she was willing to speak up, not just to her own family, but to her community. When there are a lot of old folks like me who might be having these judgments about mental health, and it's something that you don't talk about, it's shameful. So Susan, what if I'm a parent and I was raised in that culture of you don't talk about this because then you're weak, or whatever beliefs I might have about it? What advice would you have to me? Maybe I'm concerned about a loved one, but I just feel like, oh, I'm going to be weak, or something bad's going to happen to me if I talk about this, or even sharing my own challenge. Like, what would you advise somebody like me if I were that person?
So I think that kind of stems from that fear, and that example may stem from the belief that if we name it, that we're going to put an idea in someone's head. So we don't talk about suicide because it might give them the idea, or we don't talk about cutting because it might give them the idea. We don't, I think this has really changed. We do talk about drugs and alcohol with our kids today, but I think we could go back a number of years. It's like, we don't talk about these things because we don't want to put the idea in someone's head. That has been debunked, that is not what happens. No one's going to, if they were thinking about suicide, they were thinking about suicide. More than anything, it's probably comforting for someone to say, hey, I'm worried about you. I can see that you're really struggling. Can we talk about it? Can I help you find help? And I will, make some phone calls with you, or, whatever steps of help they need. If it's your teen or a teen in your life, the pediatrician is the first stop. You already have a relationship with that healthcare provider, and they are going to be able to help direct you to resources. We also have this amazing resource in Richmond called the Virginia Treatment Center for Children, which is part of the VCU Children's Hospital of Richmond. And it's the pediatric psychiatric hospital. Housed within VTCC is the Cameron K. Gallagher Mental Health Resource Center. And it is staffed by family navigators who take calls, and they have lived experience as a parent navigating the mental health system. And they will stay on the phone with you for as long as necessary. The Resource Center they keep a database of up-to-date resources of mental health across the state of Virginia. So it is really a gem that is available to everyone, and it's free to call the Cameron K. Gallagher Mental Health Resource Center.
What's the number?
I don't have it memorized.
Let me look it up.
But that's a great question.
What a great resource that somebody will stay on the phone with you as long as you need and help you walk through this. Because, gosh, that's a real eye opener to me, Susan. I didn't realize that the reason people don't want to talk about it because they're afraid of putting ideas into people's heads, which is so interesting, because knowing that there's support for people to move through that discomfort and provide care and assistance for someone who's struggling can really help that person get on the road to recovering or healing, or better managing whatever they're feeling challenged with. What a beautiful resource. So speaking up is, and that was another question I was going to ask you. Why is speaking up so important? And it's about reducing the stigma and being able to help ourselves or each other find the necessary help. And there's also something about we should be tough enough to do this ourselves. Isn't that like a thing too?
That is definitely, there's the idea that it's like a weakness of character. Just get on with it.
Yeah.
Just, toughen up kind of, which is not, we know a lot more about the brain than we used to. We know about chemical imbalances and dopamine and all kinds of things that we, didn't know before. But still, the stigma lingers from those myths that we grew up with.
Right. Yeah. And somehow like the word didn't get out about that to our generation. I'm a different generation than you.
I don't know.
To my generation, because like we know like cardiovascular disease and cancer and, physical trauma, like there's not a stigma around that, but our brain can have similar biochemical processes that are out of alignment or out of whack, and that there are treatments for it that don't have anything to do with being weak.
Absolutely. There's also the idea that once you have a mental health problem or you go through a mental health challenge, that's it. It's going to be with you forever. And that's also not true. You can go through a period of depression, but not be depressed your entire life,
Right. It doesn't have to define you. It's just something you get through just like you do anything else, like puberty and menopause. And I read a statistic once, Susan, and maybe you can correct me if this is wrong, but something like 1 in 5 people at any point in time could be diagnosable as depressed. And something like 80% of the population will have experienced depression in their lifetime. Is that accurate, or roughly?
I'm not familiar with that statistic, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. I think that to some extent, and it's a scale, but to some extent, I think that we all experience, a range of depression and anxiety. We certainly all experience anxiety. Anyone who's ever done any public speaking, or
yourself excluded, right?
Performing, or, it's just part of being human. I think that some people experience it maybe more intensely or more frequently. There's a range, but it's what makes us human.
Yeah, and we have a whole module called Navigating Anxiety, and we had Kai Q, an MD, design it. He was on the show a few weeks ago, and we talked about that anxiety is very normal and protective, adaptive in many ways, and it's just when it starts to get in our way that we could maybe use a little help, and that's really normal. And especially nowadays, like it feels so crazy out there. There's loss and grief normally in our lives, right? Because people die, we lose jobs. I mean, we have setbacks. There's always loss and grief in our lives, even when it's less crazy out there. And so right now, we're all going to feel more susceptible to these things potentially. And what an opportunity to learn to become more resilient and care for ourselves mentally and emotionally, as well as in our other ways. What a gift that would be, because once we come out on the other side of pandemic and any other craziness, that's out there in the world, boy, there's a lot. And when we come out at the other end, we're going to have a more complete toolkit, and we can be more resilient if we say, this is our opportunity to learn and grow and create more space between stimulus and my reaction and behavior.
And the more we practice it, the easier it becomes and the better we get at it, just like everything else in life.
Yeah. And sometimes people think, well, this is just too hard, and they give up. Well, you weren't born learning to play the piano really well or do long division. And so just like anything else, being present takes practice and gets easier with time.
It does. And I think also finding what works for you. So, I have this friend that I joke with that like just breathing and mindfulness can feel a little tedious. I'm being very honest here for me personally, so maybe I tend more towards yoga because I like the movement with the breath. And, for me, that resonates more with me.
Right.
So you can try different things and see kind of what works for you. There's no one size fits all.
And I love Tai Chi for the same reason. And some people even talk like a mindfulness habit throughout the day, like whenever you wash your hands, just be really present, feeling the water or whatever. You can do little things like that throughout the day without having to, go buy a yoga mat or something like that. So I'd like to just remind everybody that we are WRWK 93.9 FM. I'm Susanna Wupong Calvert here on Finding Our Fit with Susan Lindsay from the Cameron K. Gallagher Foundation. And we are talking about fostering teen mental and emotional health. And I invite you to call if you wish. We'd love to hear from you if you have any questions or comments. 804-464-1809. And you can also chat with us on Facebook Live. I love how you're bringing this all together, Susan, and sharing with us the wonderful resources available, especially for teen mental wellness. And just to recap, you had suggested eating well, exercise, and good sleep. You also suggested developing a mindfulness practice of creating space between stimulus and our reaction. Again, noticing the thoughts in between that cause our emotional reaction and then a behavior. And also decreasing the stigma around it and looking for help if you need to, such as like is available at the Virginia Treatment Center for Children and the Cameron K. Gallagher Resource Center. What other advice would you have for parents who might have, or even anybody who has a young person who might be struggling? What other ways could we parents encourage their emotional wellness, mental wellness, and our own? Do you have any other suggestions?
Well, another resource that a lot of times I think parents don't know about or don't realize that it can be a resource is that if you're concerned about one of your children's friends who may be struggling, or your child comes to you and says, I'm really concerned about so-and-so, they, posting X, Y, and Z on social media, or, they said some things and I'm really concerned about them. But they're like, but don't go to don't say anything because, I'll be embarrassed, kind of. I mean, probably not in those words, but that's the request from the child. You can go to the school counselor, and if they're, in the same school, or even if they're not, you can find out who the counselor is and the child who's struggling in their school, and the counselor can get involved. And it's a way, that they can have a trusted adult professional get involved, that it takes the other teen out of the equation. And I think it's also okay to say to your teen, like, I understand that you are concerned about your relationship with this friend, but if you are really this concerned, I think that the priority is getting them help.
Right.
So that's a good resource that I think a lot of times parents don't think about. Also, we always recommend to teens to go to a trusted adult. And sometimes that's not a parent, which is okay. I think it can be hard to hear as a parent that maybe you're not the trusted adult they would choose. But sometimes it's too close to home. They're concerned about disappointing a parent, or, there's a lot that comes with that parent-child relationship. Even when it's a good relationship, strong relationship, it is complicated. So, that may be a school counselor, maybe a favorite teacher, it may be a coach. It may be a youth leader in a faith community. There's, maybe an aunt or an uncle. There's all kinds of people in your community that may be for your teen. And I think as a parent, it's worth kind of thinking about who those people might be, and can you help foster relationships with other trusted adults for your children? Because it takes a village, right? We can't do it on our own.
Yeah, and for any young people listening, they can also start thinking about developing that for themselves, and especially in preparation in case something might come up and they might need a little extra somebody else to talk to.
Absolutely, and we recommend that they put that trusted adult in their phone, their phone number, so that when they are struggling or have a concern, that they have that contact right there.
Yeah, and I know you guys mostly specialize in teens, but it seems like that's really great advice for an adult as well, to find, and I may not want to talk to my parents, or even my partner. So who are those trusted people? And we're not here. Neither of us are therapists, so we don't want to go into that and as if we are. But I also wanted to say personally that whether I'm struggling myself or there's a loved one in my life who's struggling, I love therapy. I love therapy. Like, it's like having a really safe place with a wise friend. Because sometimes my friends, like through my life, haven't always given me the best advice. They just it's sort of an echo chamber. They just reinforce my dysfunctional beliefs. I have a wonderful group now, by the way. Thank you, friends. But just having that person who's dedicated to listening to you, and he or she is not likely to cut you off and interrupt you and tell you what to do, nor are they going to shrink your brain or do anything weird. It's mainly just somebody to talk to and to get some perspective from, and sometimes they can see things that you're missing that are really helpful. And so in addition to why aren't we teaching mental hygiene in schools, my other belief or wish is that we all went to therapy once a year, just to have sort of a checkup, just like we do with our body and our teeth. Like, aren't our brains and our hearts and our emotions as important? And shouldn't we invest in that? And with a trusted professional. And I especially think that's important, because if things head south for me, and they can head south very quickly and unexpectedly, like, I want to know that the resources that are available to me should I need it. So big fan of therapy personally. I want to spend the last few minutes talking about the services of Cameron K. Gallagher. So, like, let's say I'm a parent at Pinchbeck or Bird Middle School, and I go, gosh, I really want to see some support for this community. What would I do if I wanted to work with the Cameron K. Gallagher Foundation, and what kind of services and programs? I mean, you already listed them before, but like, how would that work for the community? What would it look like and feel like? Who would it be available to, and what would be the process?
Sure. So we do our mental wellness toolkits are teen focused. So they're available for middle school and high school use. So elementary school is younger than we focus. So if you are a parent listening of a middle school or high school student, and you are interested in getting these e-learning courses into your school, usually we end up in schools through the counselor, especially in middle school, because in middle school, counselors are still doing lessons and classes. In high school, a lot of times they're used in health class. And so there is some mental health education. There's some SOL requirements for mental health. And so our toolkits meet some of those requirements. And in the state of Virginia. And so they are used in health classes. That's in public school. If you have a child in a private school, a lot of times there's a little more leeway and flexibility in how they can use them. Each toolkit comes with a journal that's downloadable. And so we've even had a school who said, oh, we can use this in English class, because of these writing prompts that are in the journals, and we can incorporate it into English. So there's different ways that we kind of actually get into the classroom. But as a parent, the first step, you can reach out to me, Susan, at ckgfoundation.org, and then also connecting with the counselor or the health teacher in your child's school to advocate for use of the mental wellness toolkits.
Okay, and so is that basically like a curriculum tool, like a teaching tool the teacher would use, or is it something that they send home with the students to work on their own, or how is it used in the classes?
That's a great question. So they are designed to be either independent student-led learning, or as also a classroom resource. So we've had them implemented in a couple different ways this past year when we were piloting our courses with a few different schools. So we've had students actually do the online course in the classroom. And then like the second half of class or the next class was used for discussion. We had a high school implement them. It was all virtual in their homeroom period over multiple days. So they're very flexible. There's a few different ways that they can be used. We have made them as interactive as possible for a virtual resource. So there's self-assessments that the student does, which really we're trying to get them to think about their own life and their own experiences. So for example, if you take life transitions, what are transitions that they've experienced in their own life? Which of those were the most difficult? So that when we get to the second part of the toolkit, which is the skills building, what tools will help them the most in their own life, from their own personal experience. There's videos with teens talking about their own experiences with the topics. So they can be used independently. Of course, I always say, and in the world of education, I think discussion and hearing other people's perspectives, always makes for the richest experience.
Yeah, and I love the part where you have them reflecting, because sometimes if we just there's content and then straight to discussion, there's not necessarily that time to understand how this applies to us personally in the context of our own lives, because it could be, otherwise for me, it can be very academic. It just sits in our head. But that reflection piece allows us to deepen the learning and understand how it applies to us. So I love that. And then having the discussion and the flexibility. So what are the three topics again? The three programs?
Yep.
Transitions.
Life transitions, stress awareness, and resilience.
Yeah.
And we felt like, and then currently under development is mental health awareness. Those are our first four that we're starting with. And we really felt like with what was happening in the world that we have experienced the past year and a half, that these were the most important topics to start with.
Those are great topics. And don't you wish that we all learned that when we were in middle school or high school? Because,
yes.
I mean, because just think about it. Like I look back over the 40 some years since I've been in high school. And what if I had those skills? And how that would have impacted those 4 decades, right? Because I had to learn this the hard way.
Exactly, right? Trial and error and figuring it out. But
right.
There was no one.
There was no one. And what if we can give our kids this head start on this? And especially now, like the young people are just, they have so much on them, and they would really just so much benefit from it. Okay. And in the last couple minutes, Susan, maybe quickly just talk about the club or the support for the student organizations. And then anything else you want to say just in summary about this topic or the foundation?
Sure. So the Speak Up clubs grew organically. Students started the very first ones. They have always been student initiated and student led. So if a student is interested in starting a Speak Up club in their school, they need to go through whatever the process is in their school for starting a club. So they likely have to find a teacher, advisor, and then, of course, they contact us and say, we'd like to start a Speak Up club. And we can give support in sharing what other clubs have done. But a lot of times these clubs do all kinds of stuff that we would never think of, which is really cool to see what the students
Wonderful.
come up with. And so we're there for support, but it really is, it's amazing to see these students embrace mental health awareness and understanding in their school and just kind of run with it.
And really embrace it. Like, we're going to get together and focus on this and do it in our own way, our own tweeny way, our own teenager way. And how beautiful is that? Not only normalizing it, but really leaning into it and embracing that our cognition, our emotions are so central to who we are. Let's take care of that too. And let's take care of each other along the way. So
Absolutely.
Thank you for this beautiful hour with you,
for having
Susan,
me.
and hearing in more detail about the beautiful work of the Cameron K. Gallagher Foundation. Tell us the URL for that again.
It is ckgfoundation.org. And we would love to see everyone either in person or virtually on September 11th at the Speak Up 5K. And if you are virtual, we encourage you to get together with friends and family that you're comfortable being with in your pod or and your neighbors, and and spread awareness of teen mental health.
I wish you the best of luck with that beautiful program. It's helping everyone all over the area. Thank you again, Susan, and thank you everybody for listening in today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
We'll have to have you back.
Thanks. I'd love to be back.
Oop, is that my cue?
That's your cue.
That's my cue. Oh, dear. All right. Well, then I don't just sit here and watch the ladies. I actually have a job. I forgot. I totally forgot. Okay, well, it's time to go back to the loop. We're going to start off with Amy Goodman at 6 o'clock or maybe 6:02, maybe something like that. But wave goodbye to your fans.
Bye, fans.
So, and I'll look forward to